Good morning, everybody. This is Steve Saplodowski, publisher of BayouBuzz.com. And today we have a special guest, former Representative Brett Geymann. And we're going to be talking about the Louisiana budget. As you know, the Louisiana legislature is back in session for its third special session. Good morning, Representative Geymann. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine. Now you're in Lafayette, am I correct?
I'm in Lake Charles, sir.
Lake Charles. Okay. Apologize.
We're way better than Lafayette. Just in case you needed to know that. In case any of my UL friends are listening, Magnice is way better.
Yeah. Okay. So you hear that, guys. Now, if anybody wants to ask a question, make a comment, please go ahead and do that. I'll be checking on Facebook and Twitter to see if you check out your comments and read them. So let's go ahead and what do you think about another special session started yesterday afternoon?
Well, first let me say thanks for having me on, and it's an honor to. I really do feel honored that you reached out and asked me to be a guest, and because I am a former legislator, and so I do consider it an honor that you've considered me worthy of a conversation with you. I appreciate what you do, and again, I'm just glad to be on here. A third special session. Look, as someone who's been there before, I never went through anything like that where we had that many back-to-back sessions. I was there during Katrina and Rita when we had some emergency sessions, and of course almost every governor that has always had a special session to move his or her agenda, but never been through anything like what these folks are going through. And I know they're tired, and I know I'm taking their side, and a lot of people are angry at them because they feel like they're not doing their job, but I can only imagine how tired they are, both mentally and physically, and being away from their jobs and their families as much as they've been. And I have tons of respect for them personally, and just people on both sides of the issue. I just totally have respect for them, and think they're all trying to do the right thing. They just differ on what it is that they believe gets us to the point that we need to be. And I think that's been the hang up is trying to find a spot where everybody feels comfortable enough to be able to move forward.
Sure. Now, you were a member in sort of a quasi group called the Fiscal Hawks. I mean, one an official group, but basically, you had a lot of battles at the time with the governor, Bobby Jindal at the time, and with the Democrats. Sometimes you all aligned with the Democrats.
That's correct.
But basically, what I really appreciate is that y'all were and have been very consistent. Whether I believe or agree with you or not, the consistency is, to me, really refreshing. And so I'm just wondering, how do you feel about, there's a group, there's about 7 or 8 legislators right now who are under the gun, who may make a difference if those 7 legislators, mainly in the House, go ahead and agree with the Senate and the Democrats. Then we're talking about a budget that is going to be more than I think the Fiscal Hawks want.
Well, and that's going to be, the thing that we're going to have to watch is how that unfolds over the next few days. And to back up one bit and comment on what you said in the first part, and I appreciate you making that statement that we were consistent, and also that we worked with both Democrats and Republicans at times on the issue, because it was about the issue and it was not about who was governor. You have to put in perspective, at the time, I was serving under then former Governor Bobby Jindal, and I was a Republican, and I am a conservative. So it was unusual to have conservative Republicans on opposite ends of a, quote, Republican conservative governor. That was not normal at the time for members of the same party to work opposite of the sitting governor. And so I think that was the uniqueness of what we did, is we focused on the issue of getting the budget in order and getting it stable and getting it, quote, fixed as we saw it, regardless of who the governor was. And so we often found ourselves on the opposite side of both the party and the governor. And so when I make comments, whether anybody's listening to me or not is doesn't matter, but my comments are consistent today with the same comments I would make then under Bobby Jindal. And so it's not today about John Bel Edwards, and then it wasn't about about Governor Jindal. It was about what we viewed as what the state needed to do in the budget reform process. And so now we're down to, as you said, about 7 members short of reaching a 72/3 vote threshold in the House to pass whatever revenue measure it is that they end up moving forward. How those 7 members come on board, I honestly don't know. If you've voted against raising or renewing the sales tax in the past, I don't know how you vote for it now. Now there may be some members who are willing to vote for a third that didn't vote for the half, that maybe they'll come on over to the half. I mean, it's just going to be interesting, as you said, to see how that plays out and whether they can come to some agreement to get 70 people to agree on whatever it is they try to move forward.
So the pressure must be, it must be really strong pressure on both sides of this particular issue. I mean, it seems like they've been fighting over the same thing now for about 7 months, 6 months.
I agree. I think the pressure is going to be tremendous, both from the constituency at home. If you're, speaking of those who have not gotten on board with moving forward on a revenue raising measure of whatever kind, the pressure back home can often be very intense. As I look back on my career there, I represent an area that has a university, a hospital, a nursing homes, all the same things that are now looking for, hey, we need to be funded and we're looking for you to do that for us. I mean, it's a lot of pressure from those folks to step out and go ahead and move forward with raising revenue, at the same time trying to represent your constituency and vote in support on what you believe is the right thing to do, especially if you're a principled person and you're standing by your guns. And I look back at Cedric Glover, who is opposing the sales tax renewal, because he just doesn't believe it's the right thing to do, because it, in his opinion, hurts the people who can least afford to be hurt. And so he's standing on a principled issue of, no, I don't think the sales tax is the right way to go forward. And I have a ton of respect for him for that, because that's what he believes, and he's willing to be out there, on his own and basically making those statements and standing on that and voting on that. And I know he's getting a lot of pressure at home too. So
sure.
Cedric Glover, former
mayor,
representative, and then mayor of Shreveport, and now back as a representative. I had the pleasure of serving with him a few years when I first got there. I was a freshman and he was on his way out, but we built a relationship as former colleagues, back in that day.
Right. So the pressure is strong on both sides, but the pressure is also strong, I believe, if I might, and that is strong coming from the education, higher ed community. And I received a package from them yesterday where they outline and say that that basically funding higher ed is funding economic development. I don't think anybody can disagree with that. So what is the argument against the increase of the sales tax, given the fact that we're talking about 17 cents on $100 of purchase?
Well, now you're getting to the root of the issue, and look, let me say this first. I don't think anybody disagrees with you or the folks in higher ed about needing to fund them at an adequate level, and that's been a challenge for us since the post Rita Katrina bubble. After the recovery period stopped and we had funded higher education at the Southern average for the first time in years, and you know, we couldn't sustain that. The economy wouldn't let us sustain that. So it's been a challenge for the legislature from that point on. But let me back up and just say that this is where perhaps you and I may disagree. It's not about whether we should fund higher education as much as it is about how much money should we be spending, period. And that is based on what? And that my argument has been, and still is today, is what does the economy of Louisiana show that the state should be able to spend and sustain at that level over time? And the big issue with higher ed is we need stability. We need to know that we're going to be funded year to year at an adequate level. That's pretty much the case with every agency. But the problem is, in Louisiana, we do things a little backwards than most other states do, and that is we spend the money and then we go chase the revenue. And where other states determine the amount of revenue first and then they go spend the money following. We have an REC forecast that says, hey, we think we're going to have X amount of dollars available next year, and then we go spend that money. And it's really, and I don't mean this disrespectfully,
Sure.
but it's really based on a wish list of what the agencies come to the table and say, this is what we need next year in order to maintain what we're doing and continue to serve the people in the way that we are. And so it's their wish list, and then we have to figure out as a legislative body, how do we fund all these wish lists? And that's it's upside down. And you take a state like Colorado, and I'm using them as an example,
Right.
and there's plenty of other ones that have the same process. They have in law a formula that determines what the economy is doing in the state of Colorado, averaged over time, and that helps them determine the amount of revenue that the state should be able to spend without continuing to be able to sustain that. And that's been my argument, is we need to determine the right amount of revenue, and then we can have the debate about what our priorities are. And I think higher education is absolutely a priority. Healthcare is growing faster than we can sustain it. We all know that. None of us really have the magic wand on how to fix that. But as long as higher education is growing, as healthcare is growing at that rate, it is at the expense of other agencies. And as you know, and probably everybody else in the state by now, higher education is not protected in the Constitution as a dedicated fund, and so therefore, and they're a large portion of the budget, and so therefore, it always seems like higher education is on the chopping block, and it's a year after year after year battle.
Definitely. I mean, there's no question about that. And so, is the culprit the Medicaid expansion then?
I think that's going to cause problems moving forward. I don't know how much of a problem it's causing currently, but this has been going on for years. This is one of the arguments we had with Governor Jindal. I mean, this is not something that just all of a sudden today we have no money and we're spending more than we have. We've been doing it, and the Jindal administration would use games and gimmicks, using one-time money. They would sell property, they would take lawsuits, they would sweep funds, they would do anything they could to find the revenue to avoid having to make devastating cuts, but they never fixed the problem. They never aligned the economy with government spending. And look, by the way, it's a Republican talking point to say government spends too much. Whether we are or aren't has never been measured. And we measure that, and then we figure out at some point how we transition into letting the economy catch up with what government spends. I'm not suggesting, and I'm probably one of the most fiscally conservative people in the legislature at the time, and probably even today if I was there. Mm-hmm. I'm not suggesting that we just close everything down tomorrow. What I am suggesting is that we do something to let the economy and state spending link up together, be indexed together, so that we have stability moving forward, and we're not constantly going back to the people or the citizens of the state and trying to generate more revenue because we have already basically spent the money. And it's just something that has to be done at some point, because if we pass a 0.5 cent sales tax renewal today or this week, I can almost assure you that next year at this time, we're going to be having a very similar conversation again. And if not, probably within the next 2 years having the same conversation. We're never going to have the right amount of money at the rate of spending that we're doing now, unless the economy for some reason, just totally takes off at a miraculous rate.
Okay, so we have some questions and comments. We have one from Tim Allen Matthews, and he says, funding higher ed, in what elective does it help develop? I'm not sure what he means by elective, but maybe in specific courses, but not general. Okay, so he's talking about elective in terms of education. So which really kind of, I think, raises an interesting question, and that is that, and you talk about, maybe our appetite is, bigger than what we can afford to eat. And so do we need all these courses, elective courses in general education, etc.? Shouldn't we, focus more on those courses that are going to, be sciences and math and engineering, etc., where you can actually get a job? So is that an area where, the intent is great to educate everybody, but the problem is that we can't afford it?
Well, maybe so. That's something that the higher ed leaders are going to have to determine, and as far as, again, the amount of available revenue they have, whether, I know when I was in the legislature, we had conversations about different universities specializing in different
right.
Fields. And so, in other words, let's take the two rivals here, UL and McNeese, who are an hour apart from each other. That's a little far to drive every day to school, but yet they're close enough to where there's a lot of competition between the two schools on the students that are in this area and making a choice. Do I go to Lafayette,
right.
UL, or do I go to Lake Charles and go to McNeese? Do both schools need to be doing the same thing? And that's always kind of been the argument. Should UL specialize in something and then McNeese specialize in something else, and then maybe we reduce the cost of operating those two universities? But I think those conversations have taken place. I think that leaders of the higher education system have done a good job and are trying to do a good job. I know under the Jindal administration that, they tried to move students into community right. colleges and technical colleges, in many cases, in utilizing that. I know that we've grown that a lot. So, I'm not out here criticizing the higher ed system at all. I think they have some fine folks in there. Is it top heavy? Yeah, probably so. I mean, just to be honest, probably so. But probably every agency is top heavy. But how we fund it, and at what level, and what each university does, how many universities do we need? All those are great questions, and honestly, I think this should be heavily debated. When I was in the legislature, we tried to merge SUNO and UNO, right. Universities that were right next door to each other, and we found out right then and there that that's going to be a very hard thing to do, to close down a university or merge one, because people are very passionate about their campuses, especially when it's the economic development point of their communities in many cases, and no one wants to turn loose of their university and let it be merged or closed. So the political reality is that probably doesn't happen. And so then the next question is, what do we do from here? And all these are great questions. All of these are very tough questions to answer. I think they're all worthy of debate. But I go back to the same point. Until we have the budget indexed to the economy in some way, I think we always have these issues, because it's going to be much easier for us to make a decision as a state on how we fund and what we fund once we know what our economy can sustain. And I'm not trying to sound like an economic guru, because I'm not. But what I am saying is, I know for a fact that we can't keep on the path that we're on now, or we're going to keep coming back to the voters for more and more revenue as time goes on.
So let's see, I was looking at a question from David Rugo, and somehow I think I lost it, but I think what he was saying, so I'm just going to go by my recollection, was that every time the prices go up, basically, I believe the taxes go up. I think that's what it was. I'm terribly sorry. I just, I don't see that question anymore. Yeah. Anyway, do you have a comment about, I think, what I believe he was saying? Or is that just too vague? It's probably too vague.
It's a little vague, but I would say this: you know, this is what I do know, and believe me, I don't know a whole lot. I'm not claiming to be an expert, you know, here on your show, but I have spent a significant amount of time studying the budget. It is something that I'm comfortable with. It's something that I did when I was in the legislature, and I've continued to do it since I've been out. And there are economic indicators out there that you can measure the economy with, and that's your personal income growth. That's your state gross domestic product. In other words, how much product does the state of Louisiana produce? And you can also look at the national number. There's your consumer price index, which may be what this gentleman was talking about, which measures the prices of the basket of goods each year, and is often used for an index on what the inflation rate is. And then there's population growth. How many people are moving into the state and out of the state? All of those economic indicators can be used to determine what the economy can sustain. Banks use it. Federal Reserve uses it to determine overall interest rates. I mean, this is not rocket. I mean, it is rocket science, I guess, but it's not anything new. I didn't make this up. So all I'm arguing is that we can take any of those economic indicators, or we can take them all and we can weight them, and we can, you know, whatever we determine is the best path to measure the economy. And the gentleman is right. Typically when prices go up, so do your taxes and everything else, because it costs more and more to continue to fund those items. In other words, the cost of those services go up as well. So the state is always looking for new revenue and revenue growth. The point of that is the growth in that revenue should never outpace the growth of the economy. And that is where I believe we have this crossing, and where the graph begins to separate over time, is that the spending rate has exceeded the economy growth rate as measured by all those indicators. And I know everybody's probably falling asleep at this point, but I mean, that's basically what we have to do, is link those two together, where the spending growth increases at the same rate as the economy averaged out over time. And that, I think, solves many of our revenue political discussions that we've been having over the years. And then we go down into the weeds and we figure out how we best spend those available dollars. Do we fund the Saints contract, which was a tremendously lucrative contract that we did with taxpayer dollars? All of a sudden, if we have a basket of money, do we now think that's as important as it was when before basically we just go fund it and then we go chase the revenue? And I just think at that point we say, you know what, it's more important to continue to fund the elderly and the disabled and the folks that need funding, the critical services, over a football and a basketball team. I mean, I think that's a decision that we ultimately make.
Right. By the way, his name is David Rougeau, Rougeau like Rougeau Hall at UL, University of Louisiana. So in terms of the revenue estimating conference, I mean, they do try to determine what type of revenues you have coming in. Is Louisiana different than, say, Colorado, because our oil revenue, I mean, our economy is so dependent upon oil, which fluctuates so much?
Well, look, us, Texas, Oklahoma, you know, and many other states have that cycle that trends along with oil. But we also, in our revenue estimating forecast, we also forecast for that. So we project what we think oil prices will be the next year. Obviously, we don't always get that right, but we try. But the revenue estimating forecast, in my opinion, first off, it's for people, okay? And it's not a think tank room full of economic geniuses. It's for people: the speaker, the Senate president, an administration representative, in other words, somebody from now the current, you know, John Bel Edwards administration, and an economist from LSU. So it's for people who look at the numbers and project what we think the revenue will be next year based on the current model. And by the way, they never get it right. And because Louisiana has a balanced budget amendment, when they're wrong and they project more revenue than what actually comes in, we have, quote, these mid-year shortfalls. Bobby Jindal's administration, I think, had one every single year.
Right.
And so then we're scrambling to fill that hole. And so, you know, I think again, my opinion is the revenue estimating forecast probably needs to be reformed as well in how they project the revenue. The difference between us and Colorado is Colorado has in place in the Constitution a measure that says the state government growth and spending cannot outpace the economy based on these factors. They use CPI and population growth, if I'm not mistaken. And then they have some areas of exemptions like natural disasters and recessions and depressions and all those kinds of things that go outside of what is normal. But they've had it for 25 years, and they've even returned money to the taxpayer at time when they've taken in more revenue than what the economy says they should have. It's worked. Colorado leads the nation in population growth, and you know, their economy is different, yes, but it's a model that I think we can look at and mirror to some degree. Perhaps ours needs to be different, you know, based on because we're not Colorado, but it certainly is a model that has proven to work. Other states have it. They have similar models where they limit the amount of revenue based on the economy or limit the amount of expenditures based on the economy. And it certainly has worked for those states as well.
Okay, we have one more minute. Tim Allen Matthews also asked about the film industry. We're not going to be able to get to that. I did want to Lynn Matthews basically said that the sales tax is so high that people are going to buy products, goods, purchases in other states. Do you see that for your own business? I mean, you're right by Texas. So is that an issue for your business, buying products, etc., from Texas or any other
I mean,
state?
I think it can be, and I think it's something that we've always talked about when you start looking at sales tax as a way to increase revenue. What happens when you're a border city? You know, Shreveport, Lake Charles, for instance, New Orleans, you know, Monroe, all the cities that are on the edges and can, without a whole lot of effort, you know, drive a few miles and purchase something at a lower tax rate. Obviously, that doesn't work for your automobile, but
Right.
It could work for your washing machine and you know, and other big ticket items. But I don't know. I mean, how many people are going to drive 30 minutes to save a penny? I don't know. I mean, I really don't. On a big ticket item, maybe they will. I know we have a local home improvement lumber yard that runs a tax-free weekend twice a year, and it is absolutely, you know, a line to get in the door, because if you're going to buy a $1,000 lawnmower or $3,000 riding lawnmower or whatever, that's real money. You know, when
Sure.
they take the 10% off or whatever. And so, I mean, I don't know if that's going to happen or not. You know, the argument of whether sales tax is the best way to raise revenue or not is a good argument. Some of us believe that, you know, well, it's fair because everybody pays, and then some of us believe it's not fair because it's disproportionate to the folks who have lower income. It takes more of their disposable income away, and so, you know. And then I heard you said something about the film industry. You know, we have to talk about the subsidies that we do. We subsidize a lot of industry, including the Saints, the movie industry, the solar panel industry, and of course the petrochemical and oil and gas industry, among others. We subsidize them. We give them incentives and rebates. You know, there's nothing wrong with opening that up and taking a look at that as well, and making sure that we're getting a return on those dollars, and that those dollars wouldn't be best spent, you know, in higher education or somewhere else.
One last question. One last question, because I know you have to go. So are you in favor of constitutional convention in order to get this done, to get our house in order?
Me personally, full disclosure, there was a time in my career where I was an advocate of a constitutional convention because I was chasing budget reform. That was my focus. I wanted to have a convention and redo the way we do the budget process. Mm-hmm. Today, I am not a supporter of a constitutional convention, and the reason why is as I've gotten more experienced and I've thought this thing through, I can't see how we end up with a good result. I can't see how we even choose the delegates. You know, if you appoint them, it's political. If you elect them, money can control the election process more so than I think even your state rep and your state senator, because not many people are going to run to be a delegate for a constitutional convention. And I think it's going to be real easy for special interest groups to basically get their delegates elected. Then, if you get into a convention, we all envision this convention where we have regular folks out there. We have teachers, we have plumbers, we have, just
Right.
small business guys, and just, a range of just everyday, average, ordinary citizens with common sense and just doing simple common sense things. But the reality is, I don't mean this disrespectful, but we have serious budget issues, serious logistics issues on how we do the budget. And can these average folks even have the expertise to fix those problems without even really fully understanding them? So they're going to be in the convention, and they're going to be asking questions to the very same people that we're trying to keep out of the convention. So, I mean, they're going to be asking the lobbies and
Right.
whoever, all the different interest groups, well, what do you think will work? And so I just think it'd be heavily, heavily influenced by special interest. I think anything that we need to fix can be fixed with the legislature as it sits right now by simply filing a bill. You don't have to go to a constitutional convention to fix the dedicated fund issue. You can file a bill to undedicate them. I mean, one bill, they're undedicated. I mean, it's that, and I know that sounds simple, but it is. Now, in reality, will that happen? No. But I can tell you this, in a convention, I don't think you undedicate everything either. Because I think once people realize that dedicated funds are the MFP, which is your K-12 education, it's coastal protection, it's all the things that we want, it's healthcare to some degree, nobody's going to want to undedicate that. Is anybody going to want to undedicate supplemental pay to law enforcement? No. And so I don't think any of that really happens anyway. And so the outlying areas that people might want to undedicate easily could be done with a legislative instrument in the session coming up next year. And so I think when you open up a constitutional convention, you really, really put yourself in a position where some really bad things could come out of that.
Well,
that's my opinion.
No, that's really an interesting perspective. I think we're going to have that debate going forward, especially, I think, with the elections coming up. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. I want to thank those people for chiming in, and it's been really interesting. I really, really thank you so much. If you could just hold on 1 second, I'm going to press a couple buttons. We'll be putting this content up on Bayou Buzz in different excerpts, and both the audio, the video, and the transcript. So thank the audience. And let's see, I just hit that button, and we are officially